must we take this disgrace? Another Bears fan throwing insults in our face. The Packers are the greatest team to ever play the game, even if from time to time they've been a little lame.
How's it going, Wisconsin sports fans? This is Buck Life, the Wisconsin sports podcast made for all you fans out there by fans like myself, like my co-host, Mr. Chuck Schilling. We come to you tonight. Any comments you may hear from the peanut gallery are coming from the wives who are doing their nails in the other room, and we're trying to not get high on the acetone that's in the air or that will be in the air. So if we get a little loopy, you're warned ahead of time. How we doing tonight, Chuck?
Not too terribly bad. I'm on vacation starting tomorrow, so, that's always a good feeling. Packers football is right around the corner, coming up here on Sunday nights. I will get this posted tomorrow before I leave for vacation. And, Badgers have one in the books. They're 1-0. Brewers leading the wild card, unfortunately no longer leading the division. But all in all, the sports world going decently well for Wisconsin sports right now.
Yeah, we got a lot going on. This is going to be a Packer-heavy episode, as obviously we are right around the corner from the season starting. As we're recording, we're watching the brutally terrible season opener for the NFL between Philadelphia and Atlanta, and this is just some ugly football. Hopefully we're kind of spared from that this Sunday night coming up against Chicago. But
yeah, this is brutal. I mean, oftentimes you see the first week or two, the teams take a little bit to gel because the veterans aren't playing as much in preseason, because you can't afford to lose a Matt Ryan in preseason or a Julio Jones, so they don't get as many snaps. So maybe it takes them a week or two to get into the rhythm of things, but this is ugly. Like, it's just, neither team has done much offensively, defense. It's just been lots of ugly plays, drop balls, turnovers. It's just
bad penalties.
It's nice to have the NFL back. It's always exciting. Usually the Thursday night game, other than we played in Thursday night after we won the Super Bowl, obviously, but usually that first Thursday night game, it's been a lot of Patriots the last decade. It hasn't interested me a whole lot, but I still watch it. So it's nice to have football back, but this has been ugly.
As you said, football is back, and that, of course, means the Green Bay Packers are back, our favorite team, America's favorite team. So, again, this is going to be a Packer-heavy episode. A lot of changes over the offseason, not just in player movement, that kind of thing, but also in the coaching staff, and just seems like a change of philosophy, too. We had the change in general manager, so this is kind of a new beginning for the Packers as they go into the 2018-19 season. For sure.
You had the Ron Wolf era, then you had a couple dark years in between Ron Wolf and Ted Thompson. You had the Ted Thompson era, and now where you start the Guten course.
Goot.
We'll just call him Goot. Yeah.
Goody.
Good German name there. So Goot, we're starting the Goot era.
I'm glad you brought that up, because there seems to be no consensus on the nickname yet. I like Goots myself, or Gooter. I don't like Goody. I mean, that just reminds me of bad cliche baseball nicknames. But so let's just go with Goots or Gooter.
I'm going with Goot. I'm going to drop the S. I'm going to say Goot. So
it kind of sounds like a weird Urban Dictionary thing. Get him in the Goot.
Yeah, for all we know, it could be on Urban Dictionary.
Well, I think Gutekunst has. I mean, it's tough to say. They obviously haven't played any games other than preseason. But so far, so good in my eyes as far as the roster moves that he's made. The draft so far, based on preseason, looks like he may have knocked it out of the park, considering the way that the two young corners, Josh Jackson especially, and also Jair Alexander, have played up to this point. So if they're going to continue to be a draft and develop team, based on the very, very early returns, it looks like they might be on the right track.
Yeah, and I think Goot, he is a Ted Thompson disciple, and by extension, kind of a Ron Wolf disciple. We've had, our franchise has been in more or less similar philosophy now for 25 years. You go from Wolf to Thompson to Goot, and they all learned under each other. So there's going to be some of that familiarity from GM to GM. And normally, I just saw, I've seen this tweet shared a couple times where someone says, how often is it the best guy to replace the guy you just fired was the one right next to him. Basically ripping on teams who often fire their coach or general manager and then promote from within. But the Packers, we didn't fire Ron Wolf. We didn't fire Ted Thompson. The guys being promoted from within were already in a successful franchise, so it's a little different. This, obviously, Jair Alexander was limited early in preseason, so he didn't play as much as Jackson, but both of them looked to have potential to, if not be lockdown corners, at least be very, very good cornerbacks. I don't know if we're going to get a Darrelle Revis or anything like that, but you don't need Darrelle Revis. If you hit on both of them and they're both very excellent cornerbacks, it doesn't even matter what you get in the rest of the draft. That right there makes it a very good draft. And some of the other guys have good potential as well. One guy, unfortunately, we won't see this year is Kumaro, put on injured reserve earlier this week.
Yeah,
but he was an undrafted. It's
26 years old, 27. I don't know how much upside is there.
No, I don't think there's a ton of upside.
Nice
I think he had the potential to just be a solid guy. I don't know that he was going to ever be more than what we saw in the preseason, but a guy with sure hands, great route running, it seemed, and it seemed to be on the same page with Rodgers, which is certainly important for the receiving core.
Yeah, I remember early in the preseason, Rodgers was calling him by his number, and I think by the end of the preseason, Rodgers was actually calling him by his last name, so that's progress right there. You talked about Goody. See, I just
Goody. You did it. You didn't want to do it.
Slip. You talked about Brian G.
Brian G.
Brian G.
Is this like Kenny G's alter ego?
Maybe I'll just roll with that now. But you talk about him being a disciple of Ted Thompson. One thing that I think differentiates him from Thompson right away is that he used free agency and attempted to use trades to, really make some impact moves on the team. They bring in the veteran Jimmy Graham, who I think could possibly be the offensive version of Julius Peppers, because there's some similarities there. A lot of people saying they're over the hill when they signed him, but you take a look at a guy like Peppers and Graham, and these guys are just athletic freaks. I mean, and not just in a sense of they're NFL players, they're obviously athletic, but in any sport, these guys are athletic freaks, huge frames. And I think Rodgers has been pining for a guy like that pretty much since Jermichael Finley was forced into retirement. So that's one free agent move they bring in. They bring in another guy in Muhammad Wilkerson, who has been kind of up and down with the Jets, but it's, again, a one-year deal, a prove-it kind of deal. These are the kind of moves that I really like when it comes to free agency, because in kind of the history of free agency, it's kind of rare that you see a guy sign the huge monster mega deal and that end up working out for that team, or them not having to, cut him a year or two into the deal because of how much money that they make. One great example recently was when the Miami Dolphins signed Ndamukong Suh to, at that time, a record-breaking deal, and I think 2 years later he's released and was just a bad fit for the team. So in this case, you have two guys who are looking to prove that they can still do it, that have previously done it at all-pro level, and I think they're in a good spot to do so in Green Bay.
Well, and specifically with Jimmy Graham, to me, Seattle's the team that overpaid to get Jimmy Graham. They gave up an offensive lineman, and their offensive line has been horrible since that point in time.
Still.
And they never utilized him to his fullest strengths. We've only seen Jimmy Graham and Aaron Rodgers on the field for one series so far, but that one series resulted in a touchdown to Jimmy Graham. So I hope and I feel he's a better fit in Green Bay and what we do with Aaron Rodgers than what Seattle was doing, because Seattle was wanting him to block, not sending him out in the end zone. They weren't doing the things that play to Jimmy Graham's strength. So there's no reason to think that Jimmy Graham can't still contribute. He's not, yes, he's a veteran and he's been in the league a long time, but he's not 40 years old or anything. He's still, you look at some of the tight ends, Antonio Gates and Tony Gonzalez and Jason Witten, and these guys played late into their 30s. So I think Jimmy Graham still has some good years in front of him, and especially with a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, that's going to make Jimmy Graham look better. it should make Aaron Rodgers look better. As crazy as that sounds, because we all know Aaron Rodgers, when he's on, is the greatest quarterback that's ever played this game. Say what you will, I know there will people all rings and this and that, and winning a trophy in the Super Bowl is absolutely a team sport. This isn't the NBA where LeBron can carry his team to beat Golden State single-handedly, and even that was a one-time thing. You kind of need multiple superstars in today's league. But in the NFL, you have 11 offensive players, 11 defensive players. One single player is not going to win you a ring. Aaron Rodgers gives you a chance every year, which is something probably half the teams in the league can't say going into the season. They might think they have a chance right now, but let's be honest. There's at least half the teams realistically have no chance at winning the Super Bowl this year, and that's fine. So Jimmy Graham makes Aaron Rodgers better, especially in the red zone where we've struggled the last couple of years, and Aaron Rodgers makes Jimmy Graham better. It's going to be a symbiotic relationship there where they're both going to look better than they did last year.
Well, we were talking about, like, right before we started recording, how in baseball they say you win 50 games and you lose 50 games every year, and the difference of your season is made up in those remaining 62. And if Aaron Rodgers is healthy, we kind of came up with the thing of, like, a healthy Aaron Rodgers gets you 10 wins, and it's those remaining games that you decide how your season's going to go. So, hopefully Rodgers can stay healthy this year. Obviously, I think he's proven that if your criteria is most valuable to their team, it's Aaron Rodgers is the MVP of this league pretty much year in and year out. That's your criteria.
Yeah, and that's usually my criteria. The team has to have a certain level of success. I don't think I would ever give MVP to a guy on a team who's 0-16 or 5-11 or anything like that. But for me, it's always, if you take that player off that team, what's the difference? Kind of baseball, you have the wins above replacement stat, and if you look at advanced baseball stats. So something like that. And that's why for me, since 2005, LeBron should have been the MVP every single year. Now, I understand why he doesn't get it every single year. Some other guys had some really good seasons in there, averaging a triple-double. Steph Curry went off for a couple of years. I get that. But if you take LeBron off those Cleveland teams, they're picking first in the draft, and that's what they did. But with LeBron, they got to the finals. Aaron Rodgers, the same thing. Last year, without Aaron Rodgers, we were terrible with Brett Hundley starting. With Aaron Rodgers, Super Bowl contenders. So it's hard to argue because you look at what the Patriots did, and yes, Tom Brady's a great quarterback, but they, with Matt Castle, they had a really good season with Matt Castle the year Tom Brady tore his ACL. Last year, Brady was suspended the first 4 games. Were they 3-1 or were they 4-0? I don't even remember.
I can't remember either.
But they barely missed a beat without Tom Brady when he's suspended for 4 games. So that's not to take anything away from Tom Brady. Great quarterback, one of the all-time greats, top 5, top 10. You'd have to sit down and make a list of, where do you rank him in there with the Favres and the Joe Montanas and the Dan Marinos. He's right up there with the best of them. But not as valuable to his team as Aaron Rodgers, and a lot of that has to do with they have a better team around him, specifically defensively, and hopefully with a new defensive coordinator, a couple young cornerbacks, a savvy free agency signing, and Muhammad Wilkerson, maybe we're going to have that better defense around Aaron Rodgers this year.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to wait till the end, but I kind of want to talk about predictions right away just because I think it kind of leads into what the next talking points will be, and that'll be kind of why they'll be successful and why they won't. I think the Packers are going to be, I'm going with 11-5, again, because if Aaron Rodgers is healthy, we just said it, that's 10 wins. There is some question marks with this team for sure, and don't get me wrong, 11-5 is not anything to be, to poo-poo it, or, it's still a great year. I just think that there's a lot of question marks on both sides of the ball. Offensively, you have the running game, which every year we hear Mike McCarthy say, we're going to run the football more. We're going to run the football a lot more. Doesn't really happen. I get that. You have the best quarterback to maybe ever play the game. Who cares if you're running the ball? But you do need to have some semblance of balance there. But also, the offensive line depth is potentially going to be a big issue. And I'm not even going to say potentially. I'm just going to say it is going to be an issue because how often does an offensive line go an entire season where every guy remains intact? And they're at a point now where literally if they lose one of those guys for a significant amount of time, they're in trouble. Especially on the outside, we saw in the preseason the guys that they kept around as the backup tackles are just not going to get it done. Byron Bell was a guy they brought in as another guy who was a pretty good player a few years ago, but clearly to me, from what I saw, I thought he should have been cut. He showed nothing in the preseason. So again, if they lose an offensive tackle, not only is Rodgers going to be running for his life, but if you do want to have any kind of running game, that's going to be really, really difficult to maintain or to even get started there. So offensively, I mean, I think the reasons they will be successful is Rodgers is back, and it seems like he's pissed off and has a chip. The reasons that they may not, that offensive line depth, and I guess to a lesser extent, they have a ton of young receivers that need to prove themselves too. So there's plenty of question marks offensively.
Yeah, it's the receivers. You've got Adams. We know what we've got in Adams. He's unfortunately maybe a couple bad concussions away from being forced into early retirement. He's had a couple nasty concussions in his career. But Adams has the patience they showed with him early on in his career when he was struggling with drops paid off. He kind of had a similar trajectory to what James Jones did. Cobb, as much as he frustrates at times, and he's probably overpaid, he's pretty reliable. He has good hands. Rodgers trusts him. He's pretty good in the end zone. He always seems to come up with these crafty catches on like 3rd and 17, and Cobb will get a big catch. They seem to have this knack for getting, he had the Hail Mary last year. Or was it 2 years ago now? And all the years blur together. I'm getting old.
The one against the Giants you're talking about?
Yeah. So, and then after that, and we've got Jimmy Graham. So I think Jimmy Graham definitely helps take some of the pressure off of the young guys. But after Cobb and Adams, and I guess Geronimo Allison's your number 3 just kind of by default there. But we do have a lot of young receivers. And the offensive line depth, man, it's scary to think if Bakhtiari goes out for an extended period of time, if Bulaga has another injury, it's going to get ugly. And it's not just the Packers. Around the league, there's an entire lack of depth on the offensive line. It's one of those things where I want to have more depth on the offensive line, but if you look around the league, there are a lot of teams that don't even have 5 legit, what you would call quality starters on their offensive line.
Yeah,
it's a tough position right now.
It's not like there's guys that are 6'6", 300 pounds that can run and move. Those guys don't grow on trees.
It's amazing Wisconsin gets them year in and year out at college.
It's here in state we just grow them.
Yeah, the good old corn-fed boys from central Wisconsin who'd love to play football.
I think if you there was a question posed on Twitter. I forget who posted it, but something along the lines of, would you trade the Packers offensive line for the Wisconsin offensive line? And at first my was like, oh, that's ridiculous. It's a different level of play. But if you lose one of these tackles, maybe you would. I mean, there's probably at least 3, maybe potentially first-round picks eventually on that line, and all 5 guys at Wisconsin are probably going to play in the NFL at some point. Maybe not as first rounders, so not crazy to consider it at least.
No, I mean there are so many former Badgers who are either starting now or they're backup offense. They churn them out there. I mean, there was 3 years ago or so when Dallas had the best offensive line in football, and I think 3 out of the 5 starters were former Badgers, if I'm remembering that correctly. It's just, would I do it? Our starters, if healthy, for the Badgers starters, I don't think so, just because Bakhtiari's proved that he can be an NFL left tackle. And that's probably one of our best draft picks in the last 8 years or so, because Ted Thompson kind of, towards the end, the last few of his draft classes really slipped compared to the quality of his early draft classes. But Bakhtiari was a steal where we got him,
and
then also locking him up to that contract extension early, because if we hadn't locked him up, he would have got paid.
It was savvy, for sure.
Yeah, at the time there was the fan base was kind of split on it. I was kind of in my personal opinion at the time was probably an overpay, but hey, you got to lock him up because you can't afford to lose a left tackle. And now he's arguably one of the best left tackles in the league. And then, so if one of those guys goes out, I think you could have a case with the Packers down one lineman versus the Badgers. I think if we have all 5 Packers offensive linemen, I keep them just because they've proven it in the NFL. They've had the workout. They're probably a little more well defined in terms of maturity and muscles and all that. But there were years where the Badgers' offensive line was probably better than other teams' offensive line. Thankfully, the Packers have always, for the last since early in the Thompson career, that the first couple years with Thompson, we had some struggling offensive lines. Yeah. They had this philosophy of going with guys who could play multiple positions, and then at some point they shifted that philosophy and said, let's just get big maulers for those tackles. And it's worked out for the better that they made this shift in philosophy, because early on we had to watch guys like Darren College and try to roll him out at left tackle versus Bakhtiari, and it's night and day. So it'd be an interesting debate to have, but I definitely take the Packers healthy. But if we lost 2 or 3 starters, I think you probably shift over to the Badgers as having an advantage, despite being a college offensive line.
We talked offensively why they'll be great this year, why they'll be successful, and why they won't. Now, defensively, I think the strength of this team, and a lot of people, based on the preseason, wanted to say the secondary, because yes, there were some flashy plays that were made out there, but I think the big strength of this team is going to be on the interior. You have some good depth there and just some impact players. Mike Daniels is obviously the known commodity. He's a huge effort player. They always talk about him being undersized, but it hasn't really affected him so far in his career. Kenny Clark is coming into his own, especially towards the end of last year, started to pick up the sack numbers and collapsing the pocket. I think by the end of this season, he's going to be the Packers' best defender. Then you bring in Muhammad Wilkerson, who's the veteran looking to prove it. Another guy that when he's on, it's not just your typical 3-4 end that's just there to suck up blockers. He can get to the quarterback as well. You have Dean Lowry, who played really well last year. Another guy that could potentially break out even further this year if he gets the reps. You have a young potential guy that didn't get much of a shot last year, mainly due to injury, in Montravius Adams. So there's some depth up front there. And I think the reasons that they may not be so successful is we were talking about it earlier, I'm wondering how they're going to get to the quarterback on the edge. Again, it's another type of thing where once injuries come into play, it could be a disaster. So you have Clay Matthews and Nick Perry, and in the last few years, you want your outside linebackers to be synonymous with quarterback sacks and pressure, and I think they're more synonymous with getting hurt. With those two guys, it's not typically a matter of if they're going to get hurt, but when and for how long are they going to be out? What's the severity of their injuries going to be? So maybe that's their master plan, is let's start to generate some pass rush up front, keep our outside guys a little bit healthier so they don't have to take as much contact. It's a gamble, but the other thing I was thinking about the other day is with all these rule changes that are coming up, it's getting increasingly harder and harder to even legally hit the quarterback. So maybe their plan all along is get a bunch of guys that can push the pocket, put pressure on the quarterback, and have this awesome young secondary to excel and make the plays from that aspect. So I don't know.
It could be a new way to build a team. I think you still want to hit the quarterback. So I agree. I don't know where the pressure comes from outside. I feel like if we make it to the bye week, which I think is week 7 this year, so if Clay Matthews makes it to the bye week without some sort of nagging groin or hamstring injury, that'll be a plus. Nick Perry, when healthy, is very good, but he seems to have the worst luck ever because he's always breaking bones, which is just, I view pulled muscles, you can kind of do some stretching and keep in conditioning and this and that. And then even beyond that, though, sometimes you just get planted the wrong way or you get hit the wrong way and you tear something. It happens. But broken bones, there's no amount of training you can do to prevent a broken bone. Sometimes you just get hit, your bone breaks. It's unfortunate. And that's where Nick Perry comes in because he's wearing a club like every other season for half the game.
Just have that surgically put onto his arm, make it a bionic arm, or like Thanos in the Marvel movies, just the gauntlet.
Yeah.
Well, or if he's gonna get hurt, he should paint it like a gauntlet, make it look like the Infinity Gauntlet. Right. I could get down with that.
Yeah, so it's weird that, I have this feeling that by the bye week, one of them will probably be injured. And if they stay healthy, I don't think we'll have much problem getting pressure because, like you said, the defensive line is so deep. You should be able to not only get pressure always up the middle, be stout against the run. You can rotate those guys, keep them fresh. You know what Mike Daniels is going to give you. Montrevious Adams, we don't really know. He was kind of injured last year. But Kenny Clark, when he was drafted, I think was the youngest player in the league there. And he looked really good as a rookie, good as a sophomore. Now, who knows? He could blow up this year. He could be someone who's looking for a big payday coming up soon. So I think you're going to be fine up the middle, and that really will free up the outsides for Clay Matthews and Nick Perry if those big guys are eating up blockers, requiring, a running back to assist or whatever. So if everyone's healthy, I think they'll be fine on pressure if everyone's healthy. But that's a big if. And behind Clay Matthews and Nick Perry, there's a whole lot of unproven guys. And
well, they've talked up this Reggie Gilbert from last year and now this year, and he certainly looked the part in the preseason, but forgive me, I'm not going to be fooled by, another J-Ron Elliott. Or it seems like every year they have some defensive preseason darling, and then regular season, the games start to matter, and it's like you never hear from them again.
Yeah, and speaking of J-Ron Elliott, because he's a free agent now. Yeah, and he was statistically one of the best pass rushers in the preseason. So, he's someone that when the final cuts and all this, and he's sitting out there as a free agent, it's like would have been nice for him to, potentially come back to Green Bay because we could certainly use the depth. So, yeah, it's if everyone stays healthy, and that's always a big if in the NFL. I'm not too terribly worried about pressure. I think we have some guys between, our secondary does look pretty deep. You've got Tremont Williams back, you've got House, you've got the young guys Kevin King, Josh Jackson, Jair Alexander. That's a pretty good top 5 cornerbacks, assuming, we don't really know what Josh Jackson and Jair Alexander are going to do, but they look good in preseason. Kevin King showed flashes last year, kind of fought through a nagging shoulder injury all season, but he showed enough that he certainly belongs in the NFL. I don't know if he's going to be ever a lockdown guy, but he belongs in the NFL. So that's a pretty good top 5 cornerbacks, again, if everyone's healthy, which is always a big question in the NFL. But to me, the biggest thing is a new defensive coordinator. I think the game had clearly passed by Dom Capers. He was a great defensive coach a long time ago. He seemed set in his ways and not adjusting to the modern NFL. Whereas everywhere,
Mike
Pettin. Yeah, I'm terrible at pronouncing names. Everywhere he's gone, one of his strengths has been tailoring his defense to his personnel. And I think he doesn't get enough credit. When he was head coach of Cleveland, he rolled out a bunch of crap at starting quarterback and went 7-9 in a division that the other 3 teams, I think all 3 teams made the playoffs that year. Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, and Baltimore all made the playoffs. And they were last place in their division, but 7-9 in one of the toughest divisions in football with a team that has not won 7 games combined since he left, I don't think.
I believe since he left, they've won 2 games.
Yeah.
I want to say.
Yeah, and before that, it's not like he walked into a situation where they were winning games before that. They were terrible before he got there as well. So in the last decade or so, the only time Cleveland sniffed 500 is when they had Pettin as their coach. So it's hard to say based on preseason because you play a lot of vanilla, not a lot of fancy pressure defenses. I mean, for the most part, I forget who were we playing at one of the preseason games. I think it was Philadelphia. They were just blitzing us nonstop, and it was like, what the hell is a preseason game? Like, get over it. I remember making a note of that mental note, and then I forgot what it is because I'm old and can't remember anything. But anyways, it's hard to say based on preseason because you don't have guys playing with their first. You don't have all the first string out there. There's always a couple guys resting for the game. You're rotating units that aren't used to playing with each other, and you're not playing anything fancy. So this first week, to me, will give us our first glimpse at what the Mike Pettin era of defense might look like. And I'm pretty excited. I'm glad it's a Sunday night game because I will be able to watch it where I'm at.
Oh, I hate Sunday night games.
Yeah, they're not good if you have to work Monday morning, but when you're on vacation and you're going to be on a cruise ship, not the worst because then I know it will be on the cruise ship. So definitely, I'm looking forward to seeing what we've got. And, the offense should be good. The defense should be improved. The question is how much. And, it's always exciting going into the NFL season when you have a chance.
Well, I know I busted out my prediction of 11-5. Do you have a prediction on the record?
I was thinking about this when we were just sitting around watching football. We've been watching the Falcons-Eagles season opener here, and I was thinking about it, and my heart, and my heart is always, optimistic. I was thinking 12-4, and then I said, you know what, that's probably not realistic. We'll probably go 11-5, but you want 11-5, so I'll say 12-4. Rodgers stays healthy the whole season. The defense is improved. We do have a really tough stretch in the middle of the season where we play at Los Angeles, at New England, got a home game against Miami, and then we go on the road against Seattle and Minnesota. That is one of the toughest 4 out of 5 games you can probably put on your schedule. So I don't think there's any way, it's hard to go 13-3, 14-2, 15-1. Those seasons don't happen very often.
A lot of times they are the byproduct of a schedule.
Well, the reason New England gets them every year is look who's in their division. New England's got Buffalo, they've got Miami, they've got New York Jets. I mean, they've had to play no one that entire duration of Tom Brady's career for the most part. The best teams they played were Mark Sanchez led New York Jets, and Mark Sanchez is not a good NFL quarterback. So.
Well, oddly enough, Mike Pettin was there during that, and those Jets teams were good because of their defense.
Their defenses were phenomenal. They had the best defense in the league, I think, 2 years in a row under Mike Pettin, and that's kind of what propelled him to getting a Cleveland head coaching job. So I'll go on the record. I'll say 12-4. Aaron Rodgers stays healthy. Adams has a great season as a receiver. Jimmy Graham has maybe not yardage-wise the most impact, but he has a lot of red zone touchdowns. He's kind of that safety. Oftentimes you talk about a tight end being a young quarterback's best friend, best safety net. But even for a veteran quarterback, especially in the red zone, not a bad thing to have. So 12-4. They lose a couple games. I don't know which ones because they're not going to get swept at Los Angeles, at New England, at Seattle, at Minnesota, assuming Rodgers is healthy. They won't lose all 4 of those games. You'd probably be happy with going 2-2 in those 4. So 12-4. They get we'll say a first round bye. I don't know if that'll be enough to get them the number 1 seed because you probably have someone in some division where everyone just falls off a cliff, and like last year Los Angeles, everyone, they kind of came out of nowhere and surprised. But I'll say 12-4. They get at least a first round bye.
Okay, let's talk about some individual predictions, at least for players in that. I want to ask you, who do you think and I'm going to say non-Rodgers offensive MVP is of the team? Because I think it's, if you have Aaron Rodgers on your team, that's going to be a given. My pick is going to be Aaron Jones. I think he's far and away the most talent they have at running back there. Ty Montgomery is not someone I really consider, I guess, a running back, but I guess at all I don't really consider anymore. I think he hasn't really shown much other than a brief stretch a couple of years ago. And Williams, to me, just looks like a guy, whereas when you see Aaron Jones get the ball in his hands, he's that kind of dynamic playmaker. I mean, he's not, to the level of like an Amon Green or like one of these top caliber running backs in the NFL, but I think he's the type of guy that in a situation where, you may not be able to get the biggest holes made for you. I mean, Green Bay's offensive line is certainly made as more of a pass blocking line. You get him into space, he might be able to do a little bit more. So that's my pick for offensive MVP, non-Rodgers. Who do you got?
I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go with the tie between Jimmy Graham. He's gonna provide that red zone threat we've been missing the last few years, and David Bakhtiari, who has a Pro Bowl level season and keeps Aaron Rodgers upright more often than not. So I'm going to say a tie, and I know offensive linemen aren't the most flashy because there's not many stats. I know if you get into the real advanced stats, you can get, how many good blocks did they have, how many bad runs, things like that, and Bakhtiari usually grades out well in those things. But most importantly, he is going to keep Aaron Rodgers protected on his blind side, and then Jimmy Graham is going to be that red zone threat that Rodgers has not had since Jermichael Finley. But Jimmy Graham is way more consistent than Jermichael Finley because Jermichael Finley was a maddening player to watch because all the talent and the potential was there, and he had a case of the drops or he'd run the wrong route. There were so many times where the mental aspect of the game wasn't there for him. So for me, Jimmy Graham, David Bakhtiari, tie.
Fair enough. Let's stick to the offense for now. I'm going to ask you who your most surprising player will be and who your most disappointing player will be this year. For me, I think the most surprising player is going to be, and forgive me because I still haven't got a consensus on how to say this name, but I'm going to go with Equanimeous St. Brown, a rookie wide receiver from Notre Dame. I think he was picked in the 5th round, I want to say, maybe 6th. But from a physical talent standpoint, I think he was kind of overlooked in the draft, and he was just based on physical talent alone, somewhat of a steal. A lot of the knock on him was the mental stuff. I think if he really, really works hard to learn the playbook of all the rookie wide receivers that they have, I think he's physically the most talented and has the most potential. For as far as my most disappointing player this year, I'm going to go with Randall Cobb. It's kind of weird to me, like, looking at last year, it was just a shit show on offense for the most part as soon as Rodgers went down. But when I looked physically at Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb, of those two guys, I really thought physically Randall Cobb looked like he had lost a step more so than Jordy Nelson. Cobb was getting more looks, running out of the slot than Nelson was. He just couldn't connect with Brett Hundley. I thought that was mainly due to a timing issue and just the chemistry's not there like he has with Aaron Rodgers. So I was a little bit surprised when I thought one of these guys was going to get cut in the offseason, for salary cap purposes. I thought it was going to be Randall Cobb just because pre-Aaron Rodgers injury, Jordy was still on pace to have a very good season. And again, just for me, the eye test showed Randall looked slower, was harder to get, or becoming harder for him to get open in that. So I think, especially given that this is the last year of his contract, this is probably the last year of the Randall Cobb era in Green Bay. So on to you, most surprising, most disappointing.
See, that's odd you went there, because I was thinking most surprising, and I'm going to go with Randall Cobb as my most surprising. I think he's going to have a bounce-back year. I do agree he has lost a step, but I also think he's very sure in his hands, and him and Aaron Rodgers have that chemistry of having so many years together, and I think some of the younger guys are going to take time to develop that chemistry with Rodgers. So I think Cobb has a bit of a bounce-back year. I think Adams will be the number one receiver, but I think Cobb will have a solid number two type of numbers. And I think with how many weapons, because we kept 7 wide receivers this year, and I think 4 tight ends, we have a lot of receiving threats. And obviously, some of those guys are not going to get as many targets as others. It's not like we're going to throw equal amounts to all 11 guys. So I think Cobb...
I think they kept 8 receivers.
Did they keep 8 receivers? Yeah, they might have.
I'm going through my head because I think Kumaro is on the team on
injured he's on injured reserve. Yeah, so yeah,
Trevor Davis, the 3 rookies, and then the 3 vets.
Yeah, I don't think they designated him for return, but maybe they did. Well, I don't even know what the rules are and when you have to say someone's designated that they could return. So I just think that it's going to take some of the young guys a little bit of time to gain the trust of Aaron Rodgers, and Cobb will be kind of that sure thing where, yes, maybe he's lost a step and he can't quite create the space on his own, but he'll be sure-handed, he'll be on the routes where he needs to be, and he'll just rack up solid numbers. My disappointment is going to be Ty Montgomery, because I agree with you that I just don't see it as a running back. It was kind of a novel idea a few years ago. He's a bigger wide receiver. I kind of wish they'd use him more in the receiving game. You can still use him as a running back, but I wish he was more of a full hybrid player where sometimes he's spread out wide.
Sure, move him around
a bit. Because he is, athletically, he's a very athletic guy. That said, during week 1, he's someone to watch out for. I saw a stat in his career, he averages something like 8 yards per carry against the Bears. So, with Aaron Jones suspended, Ty Montgomery might be a player to watch out for in week 1. I don't play fantasy football anymore. I gave it up about 10 years ago because I hate rooting for players that aren't on the Packers, so I was like, I'm done with fantasy football. I also hated having the top scoring team year in and year out and like missing the playoffs because I'd score number 2 every week and play the person who scored the top score, yet I'd have the highest overall average. It was just nonsense.
Let's not be that guy, Chuck.
I'm bitter about it. But anyways, so I don't play it, but if you do play fantasy football, Ty Montgomery might be a good start in week 1. There's your sleeper for the week. Little fantasy advice from a podcast that has owner. Someone who hates fantasy football. If I could, I know we're on Real GM forums pretty regularly. If I could hide that fantasy football thread, I'd be just happy as a pig in shit.
Well, I will say,
every time I see it, I'm just like, let me open this thread just so it's not unread.
I will say, for any of you fantasy players, I mean, God bless you, but just so you know, no one gives a shit about your team, so please don't tell me who you drafted. I don't give a fuck. Anyways, going on to the defense now, let's kind of do the same thing here. I want to know your defensive MVP. Just to start off, I touched on it earlier. I think Kenny Clark, he is the breakout player this year. Maybe not just for the Packers, maybe just the breakout defensive player for the NFL this year. Again, he's going into his 3rd season, and he's still just 22 years old. But I think they said he's like the 7th youngest Packer on the team, which is crazy because he's a Pro Bowl type player.
And he's in his 3rd year.
In his 3rd year. So, again, sky is the limit for this guy. I think he had something like 4.5 sacks in the last 5 games last year. So he could just be scratching the surface on what he's going to be as a pass rusher from the nose tackle position, which is not something you really see much of anymore. So that's my pick for defensive MVP. Who you got?
So we're talking defensive MVP.
Defensive MVP.
Who I think, if we were doing breakout, I think I'd go with Kenny Clark. If we're talking defensive MVP, let me go with... Putting me on the spot here, and I got to think about this one. I'm going to say Nick Perry stays healthy, and he is the only consistent outside pressure the Packers have. I just got to go a little outside the box and give something different from what you're going with. I think
he's a guy that gets too much hate.
Absolutely. I mean, he's a solid football player. I think it's one of those things where when a player's drafted in the 1st round, you hope for a perennial Pro Bowler, and if you don't get that, some people get disappointed with it, and I get it to a certain extent. But for me, once a player is drafted, draft position very quickly becomes irrelevant. Now, that said, the higher you're drafted, the longer it takes for that draft position to become irrelevant.
The more slack you're going to get, too.
Exactly. You pick a Tony Mandarich at the top of the draft, and you might be a little harsher on him than you pick a Derek Sherrod at the end of the 1st round, who unfortunately had a broken leg. Like his career, we never really got to see what he could be. Yeah, we never really got to see what Derek Sherrod could be. So I'll say Nick Perry stays healthy, and it's not so much that I think he's the best player on the team, just that the defensive line is so loaded, they all contribute. You got good contributions week in and week out from Daniels, from Adams, from Clark, from Wilkerson. All those guys contribute most weeks, but Perry is going to be the one, because I think of Perry and Clay Matthews, it's more likely that Clay Matthews has a nagging hamstring or groin injury by week 6 than Perry has broken another bone. So I think Perry has the better chance of staying healthy and being that key cog and getting pressure from the outside, which allows the inside guys to just dominate the run. I think we have the potential to have one of the best run defenses in the league, which unfortunately it's a passing league, so that's not necessarily the biggest strength you want to have. But hey, if you can make a team one-dimensional and you have decent cornerbacks, which we have a lot of depth at cornerback. So yeah, I'll go Nick Perry.
Okay.
Just to go a little different.
Moving on, we're going to go again, biggest surprise, biggest disappointment. For my surprise, I'm going to go with Blake Martinez. One of the great things about having that tremendous interior of your line is that opens things up. So I think as a thumper in the middle, a guy that's going to come up, be able to stop the run, he's going to get a lot of tackle numbers. I know he had joked earlier in this offseason that he's going for the all-time tackle record. That's his goal this year. I mean, hey, good on you, man. I don't think you're going to sniff it, but and again, I'm not a big tackle guy.
Yeah, it's
AJ Hawk can consistently led the team tackles
a meaningless stat.
Yeah.
If you, especially when you're, as a linebacker, you're kind of, sometimes you're in run support, sometimes you're in coverage. It's like, yeah, if you let the guy catch a 10-yard pass, then you tackle him, it's a tackle, but you just gave up the first down. So, it's not the best stat. Tackles for loss, great stat. Tackles in general, nah.
Now, as far as my disappointing player, I'm going to go with Clinton Dix. Again, here's another former first rounder who really looked like he was coming into his own a couple years ago, made the Pro Bowl. Watching last year and then also just watching this preseason, it seems like he's always a step late. It seems like there's always a miscommunication. And in general, I think the Packers' safety position leaves a lot to be desired. And it's just too bad that there's nobody out there as a free agent that you could bring in that's, a pretty good starter. Cough, cough, Eric Reed. But I think is going to continue his downward trajectory, which kind of sucks for him because I'm pretty sure this is a contract year for him. Maybe I'm wrong and he balls out, but from what I've seen, I'm not super, super confident in Haha's play this year. But going on to you, who do you got? Most surprising, most disappointing?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say Blake Martinez because last year he was kind of the most surprising player on defense. He kind of came out of nowhere to be this leader on defense and kind of a solid stud, borderline Pro Bowl caliber inside linebacker. So I don't know that I could say him as the surprise. I'm going to say the surprise is Kenny Clark, and not that he hasn't been a good player, but I think this year he really just blows up, and he is just an absolute dominating beast. The type where next offseason we're going to be talking about, let's lock him up before he costs even more money. So I'll go with Kenny Clark. I just think he'll be kind of the new Mike Daniels, because Mike Daniels was kind of a surprising player early in his career because he was always undersized, but played with such an engine that he turned into this just tenacious defensive player. And I think Kenny Clark is going to be both have that motor, but he also has more size than Mike Daniels. In terms of defense, disappointing, I'm going to go with Clinton Dix as well. He showed really nothing in the preseason. He looked lost out there at times. He's underperformed his entire career to this point, so unless he can get something from Pettin, if maybe a new coach can get something in there, but he's been a disappointing draft pick. Not that he's been a terrible NFL player or anything, but he's just been disappointing. He's just kind of average to slightly below average safety. And I agree with Eric Reed. I'd bring Eric Reed in a heartbeat. He's a stud safety, and he's getting older, and he missed a season with the cancer thing, but still, I think he would be, if not an instant upgrade, at least very good depth. It might take him a little bit to learn the system. He's been out a little bit. I don't know what kind of game shape he's in, all that, but I'd bring in Eric Reed in a heartbeat, not even think twice.
You talk about disappointments, too. I look at a year ago at this time, and Josh Jones was the guy that a lot of people were pumping up as maybe, to be a next-level type player for the Packers in the secondary. And, again, in that time, he's shown very little, especially out in coverage. He leaves so much to be desired to the point where a lot of people were pining for him to be moved to linebacker. So far, it looks like he's more of an athlete than a football player. Who knows? Maybe he takes a year 2 jump. I think if he doesn't take a jump this year, that's a pretty good indicator that he's probably not going to be a key cog of your future.
Yeah, he is a player that last year in the preseason was one of those preseason darlings. He was all over the field, always seemed to be in the right position. And then even at the end of last season, I kind of felt like during the season, due to all the injuries, they kind of moved around. They played him at linebacker, a little bit at safety. He's kind of moved around and never really given a position to learn, that can be hard on a rookie.
Sure.
It can be hard enough to learn one position, like get thrown at 2, 3.
And that's a staple of those Dom Capers teams.
Yeah. So maybe he can have a rebound year, not really even a rebound because he didn't have a good year last year. Maybe he can rebound to what we thought he could be based on the preseason last year, and it would be nice. But he's kind of I don't know what it is, because I thought at the end of last year, my thought was they kind of jerked him around, they moved him around. It was too much learning for a rookie. Let's give him next year. Let's get him a position. Let's see what he can do. And he seems still kind of lost out there. So it would be nice if he could be that safety, because I don't think Clinton Dix is here long term, which means either someone who's on the roster now needs to step it up as a safety, or we're going to be drafting one in the first 3 rounds next year, or both.
Maybe 3 safeties in the
yeah. Yeah, we could go.
It worked for corners at least. It appears it's worked for corners.
Yeah, so I agree. Josh Jones is kind of a disappointing player to this point, just based on what we saw that first preseason. It was super exciting, and now not so much.
All right, well, we got to talk a little bit of Brewers now. We are in the thick. I don't even know if I can call it the thick of a pennant race or playoff race. We're getting towards the end now. These losses wins and losses are starting to mean a lot more.
21 games left. We start a series against who we play? San Francisco this weekend, and then Cubs at Wrigley Field next week.
Again, the Brewers sit at 79 and 62 as of recording this podcast. 4.5 games back of Chicago in the NL Central race, and I believe they are firmly, well, I shouldn't say firmly, but they're in the number 1 wild card spot. Half game up on St. Louis, 2 games up on the Dodgers, 2.5 on Arizona, or excuse me,
they're 2.5 up on the Dodgers,
2.5 and 3.
Yeah.
So you got to feel pretty not nervous, but things are getting tight now. You'd like to have a bigger lead, especially in that wild card. We saw last year, one game they missed the playoffs by, or they missed the wild card spot by. So you can say, it's one game here and there when they lose, but I get nervous, especially we just had the Cubs come through. They won the first 2 games, and I thought maybe if we sweep, this could really change the momentum of the rest of the season, put all the pressure on Chicago, and you're kind of playing with house money. Unfortunately, they couldn't get that last game done. Lost 6-4, but the Brewers, you got to feel good that they're in this spot. I'd be lying if I said going into last year I thought they'd be a playoff contender. Going into this year, I again thought they would take a step back just because I didn't think the talent level matched the win and loss record this year. But so far, so good in the David Stearns era. God, I just really, really hope that they can pull it out and at least make that wild card.
Yeah, it's one of the. We talked about this before we started recording, that it's hard to be mad that they took 2 out of 3 from the Cubs, and they've won 5 series in a row, but they haven't swept any of those. I'm just disappointed. It's just like your parents when they say, "I'm not mad at you, I'm just disappointed." And that always hurts so much more. So I'm disappointed that we didn't sweep the Cubs, because not only would we have a bigger lead in the wild card, but the division would be more within our grasp. So we still have 6 games left against the Cubs, so we could certainly get them for the division, because
I think they have 3 against the Cubs now.
Do they only have 3? I thought we played them once more towards the end of the year. Maybe we only have 3. But either way, we have 21 games left. I think the Cubs have 23 left, 22. I know they had a few games that were rained out because they don't have. We only have 3 games left against the Cubs. You're right. So we could still win the division. We basically have to sweep them at Wrigley Field next week. And then we play, after that, we have 6 games against the Pirates, who are not eliminated yet, but they're pretty close to being out of that wild card. We've got 3 against the Reds, you got to win those. We got 3 against Detroit, they're terrible, you got to win those. And then you got 3 against the Cardinals, who are chasing us for that second wild card. So they're going to be giving us everything they've got. So we don't have a super tough schedule, other than the Cubs and Cardinals. 6 of our 21 games, that's rough. Those are the people you're fighting for those playoff spots. But at the same time, you win those games and you basically secure your playoffs. If we can go 2 out of 3 against the Cardinals, and that's the second to last series of the year, that probably will lock us up a wild card. So I'd assuming everyone that's with us, the Dodgers, Arizona, the Cardinals, and us, if we have similar records and then we take 2 out of 3 against the Cardinals, that probably will secure us a spot going into that last series against Detroit, who is not good.
It's kind of a damn shame that the Brewers are on a bit of a roll right now, but I don't really know if people are recognizing it so much for a couple reasons. Number one is they consistently keep winning series, but they haven't had a sweep. Yeah, I don't know why, but a sweep just sinks in that much more for people.
I think it's been over a month since they've had a sweep, despite winning 5 series in a row.
Yeah, and then the other thing is that the Cubs just keep fucking winning. Like you'd think going on this roll that you'd be able to really, really make up some ground, and it's just like every time I look at the standings, 5 games back, 4 games back, 5 games back, 4 games back, 6 games back. Like it's just you're consistently in that because the Cubs aren't giving you any help, which is why when you lose to the Cubs, even though you won the series, like, man, that last, that could have been a win, like, that just stings a little bit more. Because, if they would have won yesterday, that would have put them 2 games back. As it stands now, because the Cubs won today, they're 4.5, or it would have been 4 going into today. And I just think the difference between being 2 games back and 4 games back, to me, is astronomical this late in the season. Like, it just sounds that much harder to overcome.
Not just that, but then you're 3.5 up on the wild card. We have 21 games left. Figure all the other contenders have anywhere between 20 and 24 or so. So we're all going to have the same amount of games. It's really hard to overcome, because baseball is such a game. We mentioned it when we were talking football, but you win 50, you lose 50. What you do with the other 62? So it's really hard to win more than 2 out of 3. That's why it's. I'm not going to be mad that we've only won the last 5 series by taking 2 out of 3 in every single series. But at the same time, at some point, you have to get that over the hump and get that second win. Or that third win, sweep the series. So, it is disappointing that they're playing very well lately. Yelich, everyone, he's put himself in the MVP race. I know he doesn't get a ton of national. They've talked about him a little bit, but he's playing out of his mind for a while now. Kane has been out of his mind. Even Shoop, who was 0 for his first 15 games or whatever. I mean, he was terrible. In the last 2 weeks, I think he's batting .350. I just looked it up, so he's on a bit of a tear. Moustakas has had a few good hits. Granderson had a home run for us right after we picked him up. Kind of the only reason they were in that game yesterday at 6-4 is because Granderson hit a late game two-run home run. So
it's coming from a lot of different places.
Braun has had a few games. He's not Braun is not what he used to be, but he's had some big games, and he's brought his batting average up a little bit from it was terrible early in the season, so he's playing a little better. He's still a shell of his former self, but at least he's contributing something. Aguilar's had a slump post All-Star break, but he's kind of bounced back a little bit lately. So we're getting a lot of contributions all over the lineup. The only consistent ones, basically day in and day out, are Yelich and Kane. Everyone else, it's kind of someone else will have a good game here, someone else will have a good game there. Except the other day when we won 11-1, it seemed everyone was scoring that day. That was a fun game, Game 2 against the Cubs. So yeah, it's I can't be mad at what the team is doing. They're fighting, and I hope we make the playoffs because last year sucked. It really sucks to go through 9 months, 162 games, and fall a game short. Like that's
you'd almost rather be dead last, winning 60 games or something.
It's brutal to miss it by that much after 162 games. It's so yeah, I think they're in a good position. They lead the wild card. The division's going to be hard to get, but it's not out of reach yet, which with 3 weeks to go in the season, that's really all you can ask for. You just got to keep doing what you're doing.
You got to get to 90 wins. I mean, so that means 11-10, I think, is what they have to go over the last.
Yeah.
So, seems doable.
Yeah, that's
stranger things have happened. Baseball is so weird sometimes.
Well, and thankfully we're not in the AL. I don't know if 90 wins would even get you in the AL this year because they're so top heavy over in the AL. Well, if you were in the AL Central, 90 wins would get you in, but in the West or the East, you got Boston, New York. My website is not loading here to look at the standings, but yeah, so it's. I think they're in good position. They're relatively healthy. You know, they had quite a bit of struggles with injuries this year. It seems that almost everyone in the starting lineup has been on the disabled list. You know, just the 10-day for the most part. You know, no one's had a serious injury or anything, but everyone's missed a little time being injured, and it's nice that they are relatively healthy coming up towards the stretch run here. One thing that does concern me is if they make that single-game playoff series, we don't have a lockdown ace to send out there.
Well, we've got Wade Miley, who's pitched like an ace. I mean, I don't know. That doesn't seem sustainable, but my goodness, what a revelation he's been.
Yeah, and you've seen this kind of all year. You know, you have Peralta out there for a bit. You've had Wade Miley. Chacin has been the one consistent all year long. I don't know what his total stats are in terms of like quality starts versus games where he's struggled, but basically every game he's pitched, they've had a chance to win, and he's been a real pleasure of a surprise this year. If we did our surprising players of the Brewers in with the gift of hindsight, I think Chacin has to be number one for me in terms of surprising players. So, but if we end up in that one-game playoff series, you're going to have to hope for the best out of a starter, whether you roll out Chacin or Wade Miley or whoever it is. And
get
even
4 or 5 good innings out of him,
and then turn it over to the bullpen and hope that you get the good Jeffress, the good Hader, the good Knievel, who had a good outing the other day. You know, the good Soria, all those guys. We have the arms in the bullpen. You just got to get them each through 1-2 innings, and your offense has to do enough against potentially a legit ace, because we don't have what you would consider an ace by baseball standards.
You know, it's funny, you talked about the AL. I had to look this up because I almost couldn't believe it, but imagine being the Yankees. Like, they could win 100 games this year and finish 10 games out of their division. Like, that's insane.
Yeah.
I think that's just going to about do it. I mean, we got a lot to watch over the weekend, over the next couple of weeks or so. Hopefully we get back to you guys ASAP as soon as possible.
Probably after I'm back from vacation. You know, we're going on a cruise. So luckily there doesn't look like there's any hurricanes in the forecast since we're going to be down in the Caribbean. Going to get to watch that Packers Sunday night game. I'll be back for the next Packers game. Maybe we'll get together and watch Game 2 against the Vikings, record a podcast then, or quickly in that week.
After a 2-0 start.
Yeah, if we start the season off 2, and they're both at home, so it's you really have to take care of business at home. But at the same time, the Vikings are a really good team defensively. Offensively, I think they're going to be about the same as they were last year, because I think Kirk Cousins gives you what you had last year from your quarterbacks. It's just, you pay a lot of money for him, but I don't think it's much of an upgrade over what you had. So that's going to be a tough game. The Bears, things go crazy against the Bears.
It's true.
We always either play them really close or we kick the crap out of them. Since the Favre and Rodgers era, in the last 25 years, it's always either a weird fumble, the ball bounces. There was that one game where I think Cobb fumbled and the ball was going out of bounds and it hit right next to the end zone and then bounced back in and stayed flat, and the Bears just recovered it.
James Jones, I remember
James Jones, that's right. It was James Jones.
Right in front of McCarthy. And he threw the challenge flag.
And it was one of those things where 99 times out of 100 that ball just bounces out of bounds. The Packers keep it, but for whatever reason it hit the blade of grass wrong and just died right there on the field. So that's how Bears games go. Either crazy things happen and it's a close game, and with their defense, they could keep it competitive, or Rodgers drops 6 touchdowns in the first half and is on the bench in the second half. So I agree. I think they smoke them just because we saw tonight in this Eagles and Falcons game that teams are rusty because the veterans don't play a lot in the preseason. But what we've seen from Rodgers is he comes out and he plays 1 or 2 preseason games. He plays 1 or 2
10
series
snaps or so
in the preseason. He gets 1 or 2 touchdowns, and that's it. And I think I'd have to look up the stats, but Rodgers always seems to start pretty decently strong early in the year. So let's say our offense is in tune. The Bears' offense, they've got Mitch Trubisky. That's
Mitchapalooza.
Yeah, so there's not even a comparison there. The big question is, how integrated is Mac into the Bears' defense? How gelling are they as a unit? And can the Packers come out and be ready in mid-season form in Week 1 on offense? I'm not too terribly worried about our defense this week because, it's the Bears. And the Bears still suck. Always have, always will.
You just took my closing line.
That wasn't even planned.
Well, screw it. Now we might just have to use that as the bumper music.
Yeah,
I think that's a good choice.
Yeah, that could be. I could definitely put that in as the bumper music.
Sweet. All right, well, that's going to do it from the Buck Life podcast. Thanks for listening, you guys. And as always, just remember, the Bears still suck.
The Bears still suck. The Bears still suck. The Bears still suck. The Bears still suck. They really, 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 really suck. Yes, the Bears still